Florida looks to rebuild after its collision with Hurricane Milton. We dig into the phenomenon of man-made clouds and if they're linked to recent storms. And the wives of Miami Dolphins players come out in support of Trump and against Kamala Harris in light of Hurricane Milton. We have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Thursday, October 10th. Hurricane Milton struck Florida yesterday, leaving at least 10 dead and tearing off the roof of Tropicana Stadium over in St. Petersburg. Here to discuss, as always, is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze News, and Brian Thrasher. He's the vice president of the United Cajun Navy. So, Brian, thanks so much for joining us. Let's just start with what you've experienced since the hurricane made landfall last night.
Well, since last night, we've had, a lot of different reports started coming in right around landfall time, if I remember correctly, where Milton had an advanced team of its own of over 100 tornadoes that were touching down on the east coast of Florida before he had even made landfall on the west coast. This caused a number of emergencies and rescue tickets that went out. The problem is that at that point, we're anticipating landfall and our teams were still in sort of safety mode. So we had to wait for the storm to pass through. And then, of course, we saw, as you mentioned, the roof of Tropicana Stadium come off, and that's where the first responders were being housed. So in anticipation that they might see some kind of delay or have some kind of be blocked from deploying themselves, we sent teams directly into the areas where we felt were going to be the hardest hit. We started getting flooding calls from Tampa, Sarasota, Lakeland, St. Pete, and then they basically started moving down into Arcadia because we know that when water comes, as you guys probably know, water got sucked out of Tampa Bay and rolled into Port Charlotte up the Peace River, and there's a lot of low-lying communities up there that tend to flood and tend to get ignored after the fact.
Brian, what do you think of the response so far, the emergency response? I mean, how would you, I know it's early on, but how would you sort of evaluate the response of everybody involved?
Yeah, you talking about in Florida?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, we've done multiple responses in Florida, and it's without a doubt the fastest response of a state. It's always the shortest deployments for us because the emergencies tend to last, maybe 4 or 5 days, maybe a week if it's a more severe storm like Ian or like Milton. But the state resources and their contractors and whatnot tend to get up to speed very quickly. And so we see ourselves starting off, going out, trying to address the life-saving emergencies and passing the baton off, usually within a week.
Sticking in Florida, we know from before even Hurricane Milton got there, they still had the debris all over cities from Hurricane Helene. So how long do you think that it's going to take for them to get back up to normal?
Well, like to your point, there was debris everywhere. The ground was already saturated from Helene, and so that caused more flash flooding. But again, I had a call earlier with some of the FDM partners, and they say that it's been a slow start only because there's a lot of areas that they still can't get to. We have our own air assets down in that area, flying surveys and being able to communicate with some guys we have with boats. I will say that overnight, early this morning, there were some water rescues or at least some wellness checks by water. Those have slowed down. I don't want to talk out of school and make everybody think that the worst is over. But for us, as the United Cajun Navy, those tickets are slowing down, which means the water's receding or people are starting to find safety on their own.
Can you talk a little bit about, we don't want to lose sight of the last hurricane and the fallout from it. You've been following this and involved with it for a while now. Where do you think we are when you look around just the media reporting and, again, the fallout from it? Do you think that, the truth is out there at this point? Is there's still a war of misinformation going back and forth? How do you see what's happening?
There's always misinformation out there. The main things I've seen, at least in terms of North Carolina, that I would consider to be, to use the word dangerous misinformation, is when some people were believing things they saw online about, like, if I apply for FEMA disaster assistance, that somehow that means I'm turning my property over, or I'm agreeing to something other than, or am I going to have to pay it back? Those are things that usually are pretty easily verifiable or easy to debunk. Now, these people were without power, water, and Wi-Fi for a while, until we got out there and started delivering generators and Starlink units with our NGO partners in advance of FEMA and the National Guard getting up to speed. Just the only thing we could do is just tell people, please vet information. Don't share, stupid memes on social media, like if they seem really unbelievable. I hear all kind of stuff myself, and sometimes I wonder, like, how anybody can fall for it, but people do.
Well, we don't want to be a part of any of the misinformation. So what is that current scene right now in North Carolina?
Well, again, this was a slow response. I don't think, again, talk about misinformation. I've heard people talk about, like, it was intentional for this reason or another. I don't believe any of that. The topography of Western North Carolina, being mountainous, people living in very remote areas, that and the amount of water that dropped down on those mountains had to go somewhere, and they channeled through those valleys and created these, like, hydrokinetic controlled mudslides that in some cases wiped out entire towns. That's hard to respond to, no matter who you are. I mean, you saw us out there with the Mountain Packer Mule Ranch using mules to get supplies into certain areas that even vehicles couldn't get to and helicopters couldn't land. So we were using state-of-the-art 1824 technology right here in 2024. So you do what you got to do to get the job done. Again, toward the end of last week, we started to see that tipping point where a lot of the rescue calls were starting to get taken first by the National Guard instead of second. So it means that the Guard's up to speed and doing their thing.
So you would say that at this point, the authorities are doing their job? I mean, it seems as if they've kind of taken over and they're very active, and we're at that point now.
Yeah, I mean, look, we always say this: FEMA. There's a misconception that FEMA is a first responder, that National Guard's a first responder. They're both second responders, okay? The NGOs like the United Cajun Navy and some of our partners were the first responders. And because no matter how much money you throw at FEMA or the federal government throws at any agency, they're never going to be able to respond as quickly as somebody needs in a natural disaster. When a storm like Helene hits, or a flood that ensues after it hits, people need help right away. It's a matter of life and death. And the federal government will never be built to respond that fast. That's why they rely on organizations like ours. And we're happy to fill that gap. And we're more than happy to turn the baton over when they feel like they're up to speed.
Amen. We're happy that you do as well. Thanks so much for joining us today, Brian.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And Peterson, one of the things that we've seen now from Mercury One, who was obviously out in North Carolina right away, they've received over 1,000 boxes for the Amazon donations that have come in. They've already sent out 2 semi-trucks to North Carolina. They're going to be sending more. Anything that, the Floridians need after Hurricane Milton, they'll be sending it there. But just to see the overwhelming response of everybody in the Blaze Media audience has been incredible. Yeah,
just to back up what she said, I see it. We saw them moving the pallets like right through the studio, and so happy to have them do that here. That is a gratifying part about working for this network.
It is.
It really is.
It's a really cool thing that Glenn has started. We're really, really appreciative of everybody that has donated. When we come back, Blaze Media national correspondent Julio Rosas will give us more from Florida next. We all know there's a lot at stake this upcoming election, but regardless of who's sitting in the White House, the fuse on the economy has already been lit. Even 4 years of a conservative presidency will not be enough to turn the tide on our $35 trillion national debt. And if the left wins, it's like throwing gas onto that dumpster fire. But you don't have much control over the election's outcome. So what can you do? Well, right now, you can go through and get your savings protected by diversifying into gold with the help of Birch Gold Group. For millennia, gold has stood firm in the face of greedy governments, economic upheavals, and global strife, and it can protect your wealth right now. Birch Gold will help you convert your IRA or 401k into an IRA of physical gold, which is tax-free and penalty-free, and it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. In the last 4 years, the buying power of the US dollar has declined, and the price of gold has increased 40%. You think that's a coincidence? Text the word Jill to 989898 and get your free info kit on gold. And trust Birch Gold to protect your savings. Text Jill to the number 989898 today. Blaze Media national correspondent has been in Tampa for the last couple of days reporting on the worst of Hurricane Milton, and he joins us now during Skype. It's Julio Rosas. Everybody knows what Julio has been just in the middle of all of these hurricanes. So what have you been doing in Tampa, Julio?
So today, I was with the Florida Fish and Wildlife officers. We had a swamp buggy, which is what they use to go across swamps. It's basically a high water vehicle. And we were stationed in Seminole, Florida, which is just south of Clearwater, north of St. Petersburg. And so because Hurricane Milton, thankfully for the Tampa Bay area, didn't actually go into Tampa Bay. It made landfall just south of that. The expected storm surge for Tampa Bay didn't materialize. That's not to say that this wasn't a powerful hurricane. That doesn't say that there was extensive damage, and there was. And this morning we used that swamp buggy to evacuate dozens of residents out of a flooded apartment complex. And all together, I mean, this was the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, the Clearwater Police and Fire Department, and FWC. They, over the course of around 5 hours, they evacuated 450 people out of that apartment complex. And that was unique because it wasn't in a mandatory evacuation zone. When Hurricane Helene passed through the area, they did not experience any flooding back then. So I think that's why a lot of people thought that they were fine and secure. But every storm is different, and clearly the flooding was quite different for that area specifically. And a lot of kids were taken out, a lot of pets as well. And that was one of the few major rescue operations that were needed in Pinellas County.
That's amazing, and that footage that we just saw is from your trip, right? We're going to be
yes, that's correct.
If that you can find that online soon, if you can already, right? If it's not already out, right? So, tell us a little bit about last night, though, because where were you actually when it hit? Were you in the thick of it, or were you a little bit removed?
No, we were. So Seminole, the city of Seminole is on the peninsula of Tampa Bay. So again, we didn't get. We were hit when Hurricane Milton made landfall, but it wasn't. It was north of the eye wall, and so typically as these things go, the north of the eye wall is what's going to bring the winds, but the rain. It's the southern portion of the storm which draws the water into land. So because it hit Sarasota County, which is just south of Tampa Bay, a lot of the storm surge came and it hit, Venice, Sarasota, the Keys over there. And so the wind was very, very strong. I mean, when I was with the FWC officers, we were taking shelter at a local fire station in Seminole, and you just open the door and it was raining sideways. I mean, that's how fast the storm was coming. And interestingly, Milton came a lot earlier than expected. The day before, they were expecting around 2 a.m. And then the morning of landfall, they said, well, actually 12 a.m. And as we're getting closer and closer, the hours kept going down, and it made landfall around 8:39 p.m., which was kind of the height of it. And so we, because this was a staging area for local first responders, we didn't lose power. The light was flickering on and off every now and again, but we did end up losing Wi-Fi. Cell service was non-existent for me personally until around 12:30, 11:30 a.m. Today. And so again, even though this wasn't the worst case scenario for the Tampa Bay area, it was obviously a very, very powerful storm, and it was interesting seeing there were still people driving at 8 p.m. Not too many, but we were kind of thinking first responders aren't really allowed to be out there when the winds are over 50 miles per hour, and so at that point it was like close to 100. So you're just having to think, where are they going? And hopefully wherever they're going, they're getting somewhere safe. But I mean, that's what happens in storms.
This is where they would say online, the Florida man is still going to be the Florida man. But I'm curious, of all the people that you talked to, you said there were 450 people that were evacuated. Those people or anybody else, thankfully, it was not a Category 5 storm like it had been when it was still in the Gulf of Mexico. It was only a Category 3 when it actually made landfall. But what were the people that you were talking with? What were they saying? What was the feeling after it went through?
Well, for that apartment complex, they were shocked. And it's like I said, it's because they thought that they were safe given what happened with Helene, and there was nothing major that happened to them. And just the fact that, like I said, they were in an evacuation zone. And so the reason why there weren't really any fatalities that I'm aware of is because the water came in gradually. It wasn't like a flash flood, kind of like what we saw in North Carolina or some of the other places. And so people were able to either leave the buildings, or they were able to go to the second floor to their neighbors up there. And so it was just a shock. They were obviously very thankful that we came up in this high water vehicle to take them out and take their pets with them. But they were just obviously frustrated because this is, because all the cars in the parking lot were flooded. I mean, I think only at the very outer edge of the parking lot by the main road was like that one area that wasn't flooded. So virtually all the cars were flooded. First floor, I mean, the highest depth that I'm aware of was probably about 8 feet. So all the first floor units were, they're going to have to be totally gutted out and changed and remodeled. So it's just, it was just a very shocking time for them. But obviously they were grateful that they were being ferried away from there from the time being.
Well, they've been in a few hurricane zones lately. Talk to us a little bit. Give us a little compare and contrast of the differences, if any, in response and what you've experienced being in both areas.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say, I mean, and obviously it's to a certain extent, but Florida is a little bit easier to respond to hurricanes as opposed to North Carolina, just because Florida's flat, right? So that you can access those areas that need help either by air or by boat or by a swamp buggy. But North Carolina, the reason why it's been so hard for people to get the help that they need is because there's only one road to their town or to their house, and when miles of it is gone because it got washed out, that's obviously going to take a long time for things to go back to normal. And that's not to say that for this area experiencing hurricanes back to back, I'm not saying it's going to just be super easy to get over. No, but there is an advantage when Florida has competent leadership. Number one. They have experience dealing with this for as long as Florida has been a thing, but also just the fact that there are multiple modes of transportation that first responders and helpers and supply deliveries are able to use, as opposed to North Carolina, where it's either by helicopter or it's on foot, which takes a long time. So that's the advantage that Florida has. Again, that's not to say that every hurricane therefore is easy. I mean, there were still miles. There were still miles of debris from Hurricane Helene that hadn't been picked up when Milton made landfall, and obviously the state did everything it could to get as much of it off the street and into dumps as fast as possible. But there was just no way that they were going to be able to take all that within 8 days, right? So it's we'll see what happens in the Atlantic Ocean. We'll see what happens in the tropics because hurricane season is not over yet. I mean, we still got a little bit less than a month left of it, and there's still some systems that could in the next couple of weeks produce something. That's not to say it's a hurricane, but that just shows getting hit back to back is not obviously a good thing and not something that Florida wants to go through. But there are ways to mitigate the worst case scenarios.
Well, Julio, we are so glad that you're safe and that everything, went as well as it could on your end. And I hope that the man sitting next to me will give you a day off at some point here soon.
Yeah. We need tomorrow. How about that?
There you go. All right. He said it seems earned, so I'm going to let you go ahead and take that to the bank. Thanks for joining us, Julio. When we come back, we'll talk about that. Is man playing God by trying to control the weather? We'll talk about cloud seeding coming up next. All right, here's the deal. The future of the Supreme Court is at risk. The radical left is trying to take control by packing the Supreme Court with their own handpicked justices, and they want to rewrite the rules and get the outcomes that they want. First Liberty is calling this what it is. It's a Supreme Court coup, and the scariest part of their plan is that it could become a reality come January. That's why First Liberty needs you. Here's how we fight back. You can choose, figure out where your candidates stand on court packing and share the info with your friends and family. And most importantly, vote. If we don't act now, we could lose the court's independence and with it, our country. If we lose the court, we lose the country. But if we come together, we can stop the radical left's takeover and their plan for our Constitution. First Liberty is leading the charge, and they need patriots like you to join them. So together, we can safeguard our rights for future generations. And by saying no to the Supreme Court's coup, we can secure the blessings of liberty and protect the future of our constitutional rights for our children and grandchildren. Go to supremecoup.com/Jill. That's supremecoup.com/Jill to learn how you can help stop the radical left's takeover of the Supreme Court. Can the government control the weather? It's a wild conspiracy theory, or is it? A recent article on theblaze.com details cloud seeding and how humans have been attempting to control the weather for decades. Here to discuss is Peter Giedel. He's the managing editor for Return and Frontier magazine. And Peter, all right, let's just start with the basics, right? Because we don't want to get into everything right off the bat. So just what is cloud seeding and how does it modify weather patterns?
Well, it's interesting because it sounds like some sort of crazy Alex Jones level conspiracy, but Cooper Williamson, the writer who worked on it with me on this article, we were digging into it, and it's actually a really fascinating story. It was invented by Kurt Vonnegut's brother back in the 40s. And actually, Cy Hirsch did a lot of reporting that the U.S. government was trying to use it during Vietnam to increase the monsoons against the North Vietnamese. So the technology itself has actually been around for a while, and we're starting to see more instances of the Chinese, the Saudis, all kinds of different groups using it.
So, first off, we're going to have to get into that more because most people, I think, like me, this isn't real, is it? A lot of people have that impression because they just haven't heard about it before. But what are the primary purposes of this in the last, however many decades we've been doing
it? It's really more, instead of thinking of it as controlling the weather, it's kind of augmenting the weather or making it a little worse so they can shoot sodium iodine or silver iodine, and other particulates up into the air. And basically it's trying to cause the rain to fall out of it so it can increase storms, increase rainfall. They can't create rain out of thin air when there's nothing there, but it can cause, we saw in Dubai, it can cause flooding. It was used during the Olympics. The Chinese used it to keep the rain away during the 2016 Beijing Olympics. So it's a new technology that we don't know a lot of the long-term ramifications of what it can cause, what the environmental effects, and whether or not we should be trying to control and affect the weather.
Yeah, when I hear that, I mean, my brain is just like, okay, which governments are doing it and what are they trying to use this for? And you mentioned a couple different countries. So dive into that a little bit more.
Well, the Chinese were they bragged about using it during the Beijing Olympics first they used it to cause more rain to clear the pollution, and then they kept the rain away. So it can also be used to lessen storms, which people have talked about using it to, I guess, fight hurricanes in a way. But we're still very much in a gray area of what governments, and especially our own government, are using it in today's world.
So if you are a subscriber, a Blaze Unlimited subscriber, you get a magazine called Frontier. And in that magazine are some of our, one of my favorite articles is written by a guy, Isaac Simpson, who Peter sent to El Segundo, California, to go to a bunch of young guys with startups, crazy, wild startups to, do amazing things. And one of those startups, right, is called Rainmaker, I believe, Corporation. And at some point, I'm sure we'll have him on the air and do some interviews with him, but you can read a little bit about it in Frontier. So this is not only real, this is a guy, for instance, who I think wants to perfect this technique to make it rain, right? Literally. Can we still say that?
Yeah.
Probably not. To actually make it rain, I think for the sake of, smaller regions and farming. So this is trying to help, and obviously he's very concerned about any environmental ramifications or, bad effects that could come out of it. But what's wild to me is that there's so many examples of this already happening. Like Dubai, we actually had an article about this at theblaze.com in the past, and people were very interested in it, I think, because it's just so new to them. So there are people trying to perfect this technology even for private use as we all sit here. But let's go to the issue of the day, which is, I think the reason this is coming up, we can be honest, is because a lot of people on the internet and elsewhere are looking at these hurricanes and thinking, I don't trust the government anymore, and I don't trust any institutions anymore. And is someone playing God here, right? I mean, that is actually something that you find people saying. So when you actually look at this technology and how it works, what do you think of that, Peter?
Well, it's a really exciting technology. I mean, especially in regions that are having drought or something like that, if you could increase rainfall and help them. In terms of the bigger question of is this getting used to cause storms, we don't really see any evidence of that these hurricanes were manipulated or enlarged by this technology. And I think it would be very hard to try and even steer a storm in a certain direction. Theoretically, you could make a storm worse, but at the moment, we don't have any direct evidence that there was any manipulation of these two hurricanes.
Peter, you've let me down. I was waiting for that big reveal of, yes, it did. And yet here we are, literally just waiting for this. Thanks.
Well, let's say, for people out there, I mean, what's definitely true is that certainly no one who's in this space knows of the technology. It would have to be secret stuff that no one knew about that could actually alter the course of a hurricane or do something to the extent that you just saw in those two hurricanes. But the thing that people should know is it really is true that they can augment, and they can make it rain, and they can make it rain even worse, and to some extent affect weather. And people are working on this technology, right?
Well, if this is the technology that's 60 years old, who knows what they have, how it's progressed and what they have now.
So you're saying there's a chance. Peter, thanks so much for just stopping by today.
Thank you, Jill.
When we come back, the Harris campaign might be a casualty of Hurricane Kamala. Chris Bedford will explain next. We are having some exciting news because we're launching Frontier, a magazine that you just heard the two gentlemen next to me talk about, because they are the people that are in charge of it, putting it out. They're the ones who've had all these bold ideas, this original journalism, and they put the powerful voices in there like Matt Taibbi, Chris Rufo, Mark Levin, and Glenn Beck. and maybe even some Rainmaker pieces as well. But Frontier is packed with thoughtful commentary and stunning photography. It's so good. And you know what? I love the part where you're going to be highlighting the people that refuse to back down. And you can get it through Blaze Unlimited, where we're taking another step fighting against the state-run media, all the propaganda that's out there, and the forces that are trying to tear down the foundations of this country. But as a founding member of Blaze Unlimited, you'll get exclusive access, VIP perks, and a chance to help shape Blaze Media's future. And it's not just a magazine, it's a movement against the mainstream media. The founding member spots are limited, though, so act fast and join now to fight for the truth. If you want to stand with us, visit blazeunlimited.com/BNT. So let's stand together, push back, and keep the American spirit alive. Join Blaze Unlimited today. We're just getting started. It's blazeunlimited.com/BNT. Political consultant James Carville warned that Democrats need to reclaim the narrative around Hurricane Milton in light of Republican misinformation. Here to discuss is Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford. So, Chris, the narrative isn't great for Kamala. So how is she screwing it up this badly right now?
What James Carville and a couple other folks are calling for Kamala Harris to do is to go out and be normal and be regular and to pal around and to talk to people about in a human way. The problem that they have, and this is the reason why, if you look back to before we had the curtain pulled over us during the DNC, the problem they have is that she's incapable of doing that. She's a really, really, really fake, really bad, really awkward politician when she's in public. She may be lovely. She may be wonderful in private, in person, although reports that we've had over the years suggest otherwise. In public, she is stiff, awkward, strange. I mean, it's the kind of person where you walk up to them and say, "Hey, would you like a beer?" And she turns to you and says, "I came from a middle-class family where we lift people up, don't push them down. So I asked you if you wanted a beer." So she's not capable of doing the things that Democrats need her to do. Now, just talking about this today with some Capitol Hill folks, looking over the polls, looking over the past races, looking over past wins and disappointments, a lot can happen in the next 30 or so days. But generally speaking, when you look back and you look at the candidate in a presidential election, the flaws seem so obvious. It's always tense in the moments leading up to an election. But if you search your memory and look back, it's kind of obvious Bill Clinton was going to win. He was cooler than Bob Dole. George W. Bush was a great candidate. Al Gore was just not the man for the job. And by 2004, the patriotism was there. John Kerry to take over for him, no shot. Barack Obama was a steamroller. I mean, there was so many Republicans at the moment who were looking at this thing thinking, Mitt Romney's maybe got this. Well, now we know a little bit more about Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And in hindsight, it's so clear what was going to happen. And the Democrats are really worried right now that they've got a candidate like that in Kamala Harris, someone where people are going to look back in the history books and say, well, how did we ever even think she was going to turn this around? She was never the first choice. She was near the last.
Well, Bedford, I think that Ron DeSantis agrees with you because he went on CNBC and said that Kamala Harris has no role in dealing with the storm. Listen.
The fact of the matter is they put out a story saying I didn't even know she was trying to reach me, but she has no role in this process. And I've been dealing with these storms in Florida under both Trump and Biden. Neither of them ever politicized it. And in fact, all the storms I've dealt with under this administration, although I've worked well with the president, she has never called in Florida. She has never offered any support. So what she's doing is she's trying to inject herself into this because of her political campaign.
Chris, this is where the James Carvilles of the world are going. Okay, you not only are fighting with Donald Trump, but you're also now getting into PR fights with Ron DeSantis. What is she doing?
Absolutely stepped on a rake there. Why the heck was she out there attacking Ron DeSantis? Why was she getting involved? Why? Joe Biden was obviously annoyed by this as well. We talked about this earlier in the week. When he's on his press conferences, he's talking about my administration, not our administration. He's saying, I'm working fine with these governors that she's out in the campaign trail attacking. By the way, she's not running against Ron DeSantis. There's no reason for her to be attacking Ron DeSantis. So then she forces her way onto the Zoom call last night. And it's just kind of a mess. She inserts herself into the conversation if you're going to do that during a Zoom call of leadership during disaster relief, like maybe have something to say. And if you look at it, it's so awkward. She gives a little speech about how we need to lift people up. No, you need to get people water. You need to lift them out of water. You need to get them food. You need to get them electricity. These are the things that are actually being dealt with. And it's every episode is like a new episode of Veep happening in real time with this woman.
Chris, what really cracks me up is to just think over and over again back to when I heard that J.D. Vance was weird. The more I look around at this political clown show of a landscape, the more it really does he's like one of the only normal people in politics that I know of. And I grant, like, he's got some quirks, I guess. Maybe there's a little emo in there and his look sometimes, or his image, right? But he's like the most normal guy. And the problem is that in the truth of these personalities just kind of come forth. The proof is in the doing. And it feels like, I cannot believe I'm saying this, but it feels like you have a plausible case for the bottom falling out for her at this point of that actually happening. But we'll believe it when we see it. And I have a question for you. I'm curious what you make of this Trump rally in New York. I think part of me thinks it's just awesome. Madison Square Garden, like Trump, this is going to be amazing. But of course, there's also the sort of naysayers or people saying, do they really think they can win New York? Like, does this really make sense campaign wise? What do you think about this location and this rally?
Well, it's not about New York. It's about holding it in the commercial capital of America. It's about holding a rally in the capital of American liberalism and saying we can fill Madison Square Garden. It reminds me a lot of when Young Americans for Freedom, the activist group that helped propel Barry Goldwater to the nomination, helped back Ronald Reagan to the nomination, when they were just 2 years old, started by Bill Buckley in Connecticut and a bunch of young people, they filled Madison Square Garden in New York with over 18,000 people who were there to rally against communism. And the liberals were blown away. This was just a few years before Bill Buckley was going to run for mayor and actually do fairly well. It shows a shot in the dark or a light in the dark for Republicans. And Democrats, by the way, they do this very well. They force Republicans to spend millions of dollars defending Texas every 2 to 4 years or every 6 years, depending. Republicans have to do that because they decided to play in that battlefield. So when Republicans play the head game, and they go into liberal Democrat territory, which they're not going to win. There's going to be protest votes. There always are. Upstate New York is very red. They're not going to win it, but they're going to put them on the defensive. And more than that, it's a broad symbol of what the popularity of Donald Trump, because even though that rally is going to have a lot of people coming from New Jersey and upstate New York and Pennsylvania, you could fill it with Donald Trump fans just from the 5 boroughs, no question.
Let's look ahead to this, right? Because that's going to be about 9 days before the election. What's the messaging? What's going to be happening on all the other, state-run media when Donald Trump is there in New York City just a week and a half before the election doing something like this?
They've already started to tease that. They're saying they're comparing it not to the 1962 Young Americans for Freedom rally, which is what it's kind of closer to. They're trying to compare it to the German-American Bund that held a Nazi rally there in the late 20s or early 30s. There's absolutely no comparison. And the funny thing is they're so lacking in historical knowledge, and they're so lacking in self-awareness that their response is, we must shut down this free speech and raid this place because the thoughts could be dangerous. They're going to go with that. How could you let these dangerous ideas be spread? But here's another thing that the Trump campaign ought to really be focused on. Over and over again, today alone, I've been hearing from them, we're doing well in Wisconsin, we're doing well in Michigan, we're doing well in Arizona. Nevada may be a hard one to actually get. And I keep on asking, well, what about Pennsylvania? Because you're on the right track in Pennsylvania, but none of that matters. None of that works if you don't get the Keystone State. So that's got to be a focus. New York is a short drive from a lot of the boroughs of Philadelphia. People are going to be there, but that's where their Trump campaign's focus needs to be.
All right, Bedford, what can people look forward to you for all the Beltway Brief tomorrow?
Tomorrow, we've got an exclusive interview with the chairman of the RNC, Michael Whatley, who we've been talking to previously here, who is from Western North Carolina and is going to give us a little bit of pull back the curtain a little bit on the mission that the RNC and allied groups in the Republican Party are doing in Carolina. for the people and then for the vote.
We look forward to it. And I look forward to this fall look every day from you now, Bedford. I appreciate that you put in the effort to make it feel like fall, because it definitely doesn't here in Texas.
Light a pumpkin candle. It's as close as you'll get.
That's it. That's what we'll be doing. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye, Bedford.
See you then.
Donald Trump, you know what? He is continuing to gain support in Florida, and we'll tell you why the wives of Miami Dolphins players have praised him and bashed Kamala next. How many professional athletes are now Team Trump? Two wives of Miami Dolphins players recently came out in support of Donald Trump on social media. And sports writer Andrew Chapados recently wrote a piece for this on theblaze.com. And Andrew joins us now. So how did Trump get praise from a fairly unlikely source here, Andrew?
I think it helps being in Florida, and inherently a lot of players want to go to Florida in many sports leagues because of the lower taxes and the amenities that they get down there. But this was the wives of two players on the Miami Dolphins. The quarterback's wife, the starting quarterback, he's injured right now with a concussion, but his wife and then one of their best running backs, they both have taken to social media, I believe on Instagram, both of them, and they're basically supporting Trump. And they're sharing stories that are in support of Trump. One of them was regarding, Kamala's lack of communication with Ron DeSantis over the hurricane down in Florida, and she was basically criticizing him for not wanting to talk to him. And he came back and said that she's been in office for 4 years and she's never called before, so why would I call her now? So one of them shared that story, and then they both shared generic messages for Trump by posting articles and sorts of things and saying that's my president. But the really funny one was from Mostert, the running back's wife, where she called Kamala trash. She said this isn't it. And she used her own line against her, more of Kamala's like doublespeak, where she tries to say the same lines over and over again and hope it just kills the time, I guess. But, what we're seeing is these husbands, these huge stars, Tagovailoa has an insane contract, tens of millions of dollars, right? And they're not saying, honey, let's not be political here. I'm the star quarterback. They're just letting it fly. And that's completely different than what I think we've seen from athletes in years past.
Now, Andrew, what's the fallout of this? Because, if we lived in a sensible time frame, right, a sensible timeline, a sensible era with a serious country and serious people, no one would care. We would say, oh, yeah, of course, the wives of athletes have political opinions, and some of them are Republican and some of them are Democrat, right? But we don't live in that universe. So what's the fallout, Ben? Is anyone are they safe? Are there people coming after them on the left, or will there be any fallout?
People will come after them. I'm confident in that. We saw that with Patrick Mahomes' wife, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs quarterback, big star, Super Bowl champion. Her wife dared to say, something remotely in favor of Trump, basically that she didn't hate him, and she got bombarded with messaging. And it's really confusing in the NFL, right? Especially with those Kansas City Chiefs. You've got Patrick Mahomes, who seemingly is impartial, his wife that's pro-Trump, and then he's throwing to a guy in Travis Kelce who's got a sponsorship with Pfizer and Bud Light, who's allegedly dating. I say allegedly because I don't believe it's real.
I'm with you, Andrew. I'm a resident Swiftie here. I'm totally with you. Keep going. Sorry.
Impressive.
Yeah.
And Taylor Swift is dating him allegedly. And, her political leanings going back to 2017 have been Democrats. So it gets very confusing in some of these locker rooms. But will the Miami players' wives get hate? Of course they will. Every single time somebody says something in support of Trump that is just supporting Trump, they get hate from it. But we have the example of Brittany Mahomes, who got tons of hate for it. And people are getting hate when they just like things that are liked by Trump personnel. So it gets really easy to pile on. But then again, we sort of have to remember that these are people who probably don't watch football anyways. Like, I can go and I can criticize Taylor Swift's albums or her political views, but I'm not going to her concert. So is it really going to affect it?
Listen, that's where you lost me, Andrew. But up until that point, I was completely with you. And we do really appreciate you coming on the show tonight. Thanks so much.
No problem. Down with Taylor. Just kidding. Just kidding.
That's okay. We cannot transition from that to all the Taylor hate. So at this point, it is just one of those things where people are okay to come out and talk in favor of Donald Trump. And this is so different. And we've talked about this before on one of the debate nights. Mm-hmm. People used to be scared to come out and talk about Donald Trump in a way, oh, we're quietly going to be voting for Donald Trump. Now they're openly saying it on social media, even if you're a wife or a girlfriend of an NFL player. They're not scared anymore.
Yeah, well, first off, I think Andrew is scared to come back on the program.
He should be for Tay-Tay alone.
Don't worry, Andrew. We love Andrew. You're going to be back on. You'll be fine. We should talk about Taylor a little bit at the end of this. But I think that
don't tempt me.
That what you're seeing is part of a trend. I don't like to, unnecessarily say this is, a trend. We won't know. We'll have to see what happens in the next historic 3-4 weeks or however long the election process will take. But certainly we see signs. It's different than it was before. I agree with you. You see across the landscape people speaking out in ways they haven't for a long time.
Again, about 3.5 weeks until the election. Did we have it on anybody's bingo card this year that Donald Trump would be speaking at Madison Square Garden right before Election Day? I would not have thought that was going to happen, and yet here we are.
This is, I think, like Chris intimated, this is a sign of, I want to demonstrate power and strength. I want to say, this is mainstream. This is the heart of the country turning against the tide. And, this is the turning of the tide. That's what the Trump campaign is saying. And look, I think there's a lot of truth to it. I see it happening. But of course, the question, as we all know, is can you get past the margin of, structural favoring? Okay. Can you get past the cheating, right? Can you do that?
We just got kicked off YouTube. There it is. You know what? I look at it, though, and so many things are finally taking place and taking shape right now because of these two hurricanes that have just gone through. And you see the ineffectiveness of Kamala Harris, where she's going out there and she's trying to lead. Yeah. And it's been completely undermined by just her own incompetence.
No, that's a great point, too, because this is kind of a layup for a politician, right? I mean, disaster response is sort of like, how can you screw that up? If you're prepared, you know something about anything, you come out and you say the right things. And instead, she's kind of got hosed in a variety of directions. It just everything that she's doing is going wrong. And even the leftists in the media seem to recognize it.
And if there's one person that I don't want to pick a fight with on the one topic that he is knockout great at, it is Ron DeSantis and disaster preparation. So that's it. And she just, again, it's not knowing the limits of what you should be doing.
It's just very simple, like, Kamala, don't talk against competence. Don't get in the camera with competent people.
Don't do it. But yet, there she is. And we'll be back tomorrow night to break down whatever else she may or may not say between now and then. Thanks for watching, everyone.